Undertaker is back in the headlines because of what he recently said in this video. I'm going to tell you exactly what is going on. Because The Undertaker is obviously one of the biggest names in the history of the world of pro wrestling, right? Especially from WWE, the creation of Vince McMahon. Without Vince McMahon, Mark Calloway would not have been able to portray The Undertaker, the character, and without Mark Calloway, The Undertaker would not become the guy, the figure, the gimmick in which fans adore, and a figure that they beloved. Now, the world of pro wrestling, it has to be a tough business. You have to be mentally tough. You have to be physically tough. The demand on your body from a athletic standpoint is brutal, but also you have to have a tough mind because of how daunting and grueling a pro wrestling schedule, especially in WWE, is, especially a schedule in which WWE once had. And throughout the years, they've tweaked the schedule, and I would say right now they probably had their best schedule yet. And The Undertaker has been outside the company since 2020. Let's not forget the Boneyard match. What a fitting out The Undertaker had in 2020 during the pandemic. He was supposed to work AJ Styles at WrestleMania 36, and then the world shut down and they had to pivot, and instead of doing a empty arena match, which The Undertaker has been a part of in the past, most notably I confuse that with the Boiler Room Brawl match with Mankind back in the day. Those were lots of fun. I highly recommend you go on Peacock and check those out. But nonetheless, The Undertaker, knowing that this was going to be his last ride. I mean, heck, WWE did a documentary about this man and the journey in which he had to go through. And you go back and you watch this Peacock documentary. It is, A, one of the best documentaries that WWE has ever done, but B, the struggle in which he came to grips with his retirement from an in-ring perspective, it weighed on him for years. Michelle McCool, his wife, would talk about how he would go from these highs and lows. He would go from, okay, I had a great match, I think I'm done, and then Vince McMahon would reel him back in. Hey, can you do one more match? And then he would do one more match, and then guess what? He would have a bad performance. And so he felt like, well, I couldn't go out that way. I couldn't go out on a bad performance. He's talked about this in interviews. He's talked about this on his Peacock documentary. He talked about this on his own podcast. The struggle in which to walk away from the in-ring life was brutal because that's all he's known for decades. And when he had his Boneyard match with AJ Styles, the perfect match at the perfect event against the perfect opponent. You cannot go out any better than The Undertaker. Maybe Sting at AEW Revolution. Maybe. That was probably the best retirement match I've ever seen. But at least it was nowhere near like a Ric Flair, when he was working Jeff Jarrett and teaming with Andrade. I mean, granted, I guess you could say Flair's retirement match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 10 years ago was great. That was great as well. I would agree with that. So anyway, The Undertaker, he was on his podcast on Patreon, and he was talking about the struggles in which he's had making the transition from wrestling to now. And he said, my transition, I knew my time had come, but I wasn't ready for it to come. I just knew that my body couldn't deliver what my mind and my heart wanted to give the fans, and it was kind of difficult. You have to remember, for half of my life, being in the ring is what I did, and then it's not there anymore. It leaves a huge void in you because you're trying to fill that void, which was a passion. You're trying to find out what that next passion is and what it is that you're going to sink your teeth into. And there's just maybe not something there that will ever refill that void. This is where he really got into it. He said, I watch, meaning the product. It's hard for me still to this day. When I retired in 2020 and here we are in 2024, I still find myself sometimes struggling, not so much at home. I'm more analytical and more of an analyst type when I'm watching it at home. But if I'm like live in the venue, there's a lot of times where I just have to leave because there's that thing in me that's saying you should be ready to go to the ring. I hope it goes away at some point, but as of now, it hasn't. Think about that for a minute. He's backstage, he's hanging out with the guys. It's almost like an itch. I don't know what he's necessarily going through, but as someone who has struggled with substance abuse issues, I can understand his viewpoint of it's an itch, and until you can itch it or you can distract your mind from it, it's something where you cannot focus on anything. It makes you feel like you're coming out of your skin. That's at least my own experience. I don't know what Taker deals with, but if you look at it, this was a guy that he was a workhorse for WB. For many, many years, the man rarely worked without being injured, right? Like, they all deal with injuries. We get that, but Taker had a broken orbital bone. He worked that, right? It wasn't really until 99 when he felt in a combination of nagging injuries, but as well as him feeling kind of stale. Hey, I need to take time off. And he came back in 2000 as the biker gimmick, right? And then throughout the 2000s, he pretty much worked that schedule. And then things started to fall apart in 2010. He had to take some time off, right? He did that horrific feud with Kane in the fall of that year, right? I did not like that feud whatsoever. And then he was still putting on good WrestleMania matches. It really wasn't the downfall of The Undertaker at WrestleMania where, like, he's not going out there putting 5-star matches on, in my opinion. Okay? My opinion. Probably once the streak broke that match. I didn't like that match. Obviously, the man was concussed like moments into it, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But Punk at WrestleMania 29 in 2013, that was his last great match, in my opinion. And then he went on and he had good matches here and there, right? I really liked his last match, but I don't consider that to be a normal pro wrestling match, a normal Undertaker match, a 5-star match. I consider that more to be a cinematic match, which is technically what it is, but you get the gist. Some cinematic matches are so great that you can kind of bypass the fact that they're cinematic. I think of Tommaso Ciampa, Johnny Gargano from NXT in the pandemic. That was technically a cinematic match, but they did it so well that I didn't view it as a cinematic match. AJ Styles versus The Undertaker. For The Undertaker, at his age, at the state of his body, all the variables that go into it, I'm glad that he retired when he did, because he did not want people to remember what he used to be while he was wrestling. And I think he was getting close to that. Either way, I'm glad that he walked away when he did. Let me know down in the comments area below. What do you think about The Undertaker's opinion, or comments rather, about his retirement and much, much more?